This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air on our Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch channels. We're here for the first time with Gerard Longo. That's how I say your name?
Gerard.
Gerard Longo, founder and CEO of Underground Music Collective. And we're going to focus on how emerging artists can grow awareness of their music. And that's something that I think anybody would want to do. And I'm a musician myself, so we're putting that topic up there.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm a producer, musician, keyboardist, sound designer. I'm a synthesis. But
got a lot going on.
Yeah, I do a lot of different things. I got a lot of different hats. You know, you got the Phantom Electric Ghost hat, and then I got all my mugs behind me. But so I think like one of your points is like every underground movement needs a leader who knows what it takes to rise through, and where we can kind of talk about like how you've taken that role.
Yeah. I think, that started well before the platform began, as far as, feeling like the underdog. I feel like I've been an underdog my entire life. I played high school football, but I wasn't the star. I walked in freshman year, 5'10", 125 pounds. People were whispering, "What's he doing here? What's he doing here?" And so I kind of wore that chip on my shoulder, and kind of reveled in it a bit, like I've always liked pushing past, what I thought I could do. I've always liked pushing past what other people thought I could do. And so, I think it's prepared me for, this journey of being an independent creative, because, building a platform like Underground Music Collective, even though I'm not an active musician, right? Like there are still so many similar nuances between what I'm doing and what an independent musician goes through. You're building something from zero, and you're building something in an industry that doesn't necessarily favor you. And in a lot of ways, does the opposite of that, right? It's tough sledding to build this and to really like wrap your head around everything to where you understand it enough to know what you need to do, who you need on your side to help you do it, and the best practices, right? And so I think going through something, like, my experiences, in high school football, my experiences just growing up in general, undersized, never the cool kid in class, that kind of thing. Like it prepared me for this, because you're going to deal with, setbacks. You're going to deal with rejection. You're going to deal with these things that are going to test you, and they're going to test your mettle, and they're going to inspire you to rise to the occasion, whatever that occasion may be at the time. Right. And so I can tell you that's translated over the past 10 years since launching our podcast, The Quinn Spin, which was the whole point of singularity of this whole Underground Music Collective platform. There have been so many times where it's been tested, and where I've been tested, where challenges have arisen. And fortunately, I can say, 10 years in, we've risen to every one, and, we're still here, but it's not just business. It's not just growing that platform from zero, but it's all the life things that'll come at you, right? It's losing a family member. I lost my mom in 2015 unexpectedly. It's going through a breakup. It's, the bouts of financial instability you'll deal with when you are building your platform and you're trying to just build that from the ground up, and you need to invest in it. You need to make sure your bills are paid. Like it's keeping that all in balance, right? And so, there are so many things about, this journey that is a true underdog journey that, makes it a true underdog story, no matter who you are, where you started from. The point is, when you start, you don't have that platform. You have to create that platform, and you need to find ways to rise above the challenges that'll get in your way.
Yeah, it's interesting because as a musician, I've been an underground musician. I'm 55 years old. I've been playing since I was 17. Found that podcasting has been something that I didn't stop doing music. I put out 4 albums this year. But as a podcaster, I've been able to get into a pretty good place as an independent podcaster. I've been doing podcasts since 2016, episode 890.
Congratulations.
And so we've been out here for a while. And we started with musicians, but then we branched to like life coaches and therapists and CEOs. And we've talked to Grammy award-winning producers. We've been able to talk to a lot of different people we just find interesting. And we started with the idea of expansion. Expansive is our type of sound. I do punk music, I do rock, I do everything. So when we did the podcast, I said, well, let's make it expansive, which means I don't have to have boundaries. in terms of who I want to talk to. I can talk to anybody I find interesting.
Right.
And people told me initially as a podcast, oh, you got to be a narrow niche. You can't do beyond EDM. You can't do beyond tech. I said, I just blew that out. And I said, I've been doing exactly what I want, talking to whoever I wanted. And it's been growing. And it's basically like, you have to listen to what critics tell you. But I've always been into the underground. I've been into, I always was into like the Velvet Underground. I was into bands like Big Star. I liked the college radio scene. I was into like the Replacements and Husker Du and all this like stuff that was like underground. Even today, I talk to primarily emerging and independent artists. I've interviewed 300 different musicians all over the world, and they're not all in the top 20 or the top 10. They're probably people you never heard of. And I thought they needed a voice, and that's what I've been doing with the podcast. Is I had a mission to kind of do what you're doing with your collective. Is I've been doing since 2016.
Right. Yeah. And I want to touch on something you said there, as far as, people telling you what it needs to be, right? Because you're always going to get that feedback, and you do need to listen to the feedback. But I think, as I go on my journey, and again, coming up on 10 years here, like it's about, to me, like knowing the rules well enough to break them, and knowing what works for you, knowing what works for your platform, your audience, identifying that audience in the first place, and really understanding what's going to resonate. And part of that is broadening. Part of that is expanding past, your typical niche, your typical genre, and experiencing new perspectives, experiencing, people in different aspects of the industry and different creative industries altogether, and getting their input into the pot here. Because I think, for as different as like our day-to-day might be, as far as the work we actually do and we put out, like there are a lot of common threads that we experience as creatives, right? And so I think it's really important to branch out to those folks, right? Because you're going to find that you have more in common than maybe meets the eye, that maybe your layperson would think like, oh, these people are in two different industries. Like he had a musician on this week, he had a therapist on the next week. Like, where's the continuity? The continuity is in the journey. The continuity is in the human experience that we're having, and how that translates and how we use that in what we're doing.
Yeah, what I find is like, influencing, right, or becoming somebody who's a mentor. Like I always argue, like the Beatles were like the biggest mentors to a whole generation of all kinds of creators, from actors to musicians to, scientists. They were all inspired because of what the Beatles did. And so music is so powerful that it can cross over. And I've been able to, talk to CEOs, and they say, well, how could you talk to a CEO when you talk about music? Well, they like music. I talked to this guy, he loved the Stones. And we started talking about his love of the Stones and how he used music for his creative process and how, helped him. And I found ways to kind of weave the thread of the creativity and the power of music into everyday life in all aspects.
Right.
And that's how I kind of thread the needle,
Yeah. I mean, it is a universal language, more so than, I would say, almost any other artistic medium. I would put it up against any other artistic medium, as far as a universal language. Like everybody has their taste in music. And what we're finding now in this age of the genres kind of melding and coming together and blending is that people's tastes, individual tastes, are varying. Like if you look at one of my playlists, one of my personal ones right now, it's all over the place. You have all kinds of different artists on there, hip hop, you have rock, you have R&B, you have everything under the sun, Americana, right? And that's reflected in how we approach our platform too, is we don't leave any genre behind, and we don't leave anything out, because it's all artistic expression. It's all art to somebody, right? Now, I mean, there are certain quality standards, production standards, that kind of thing that it has to meet, because we want to, of course, elevate people who are taking their craft seriously. But like that can happen across genres, that can happen across different ideas and perspectives. It's not ours to judge like, well, this is good music versus this is bad music in terms of the genre or in terms of the subject matter. Is what moment does it serve, and how does it serve that moment, and how does it resonate with its intended audience? I think that's really the most important thing across this medium. And again, we're finding in this age of digital music discovery and algorithmic playlists and people being able to go out and find it on their own, a lot of people's tastes and palates are broadening, which I think is a great thing for the industry because it opens people's minds, number one, as a consumer, and it opens up more doors for collaboration that maybe wouldn't have been open before, or, maybe artist X in this genre wouldn't have ever thought about collaborating with artist Y, but then they hear something similar, in terms of two styles coming together, and they're like, hey, I like that idea. Maybe we could do something like that. Let's try to experiment with that idea. I think there's, we're in a great age of experimentation. We're in a great age of just people being able to discover things and make them their own. And it allows us to really find the common threads and the common truths within that, for sure.
Yeah, because I grew up, with college radio, being a kid, listening to the early stuff that was like not, bands like REM. That, when they were on IRS records, they were in the college radio scene. The kids like me, they kind of pushed them because we were like, wow, these guys don't sound like anybody. I mean, it's a little bit of Birds, but it's not the Birds.
Right.
They sound like something else. And then when I heard the Talking Heads, like in '78, I was like, wow, I never heard anything like that. What is that? And I started checking out the whole CBGB scene. And then I was like, whoa, you got the Ramones coming out of that scene. You got Television coming out of that scene. You had Blondie coming out of that scene. And what the thing I liked about that time period, all those bands were all very different. They're coming out of that CBGB scene, but they didn't sound the same. The Heads don't sound like Blondie. Television doesn't sound like the Ramones. And so like the people had a lot of cross-pollination, even in the same club. You could have different type of stuff playing. And that's what I kind of liked about that era. I grew up as a kid that watched like progressive rock bands like Genesis and Yes, and then have a rebellion with the Sex Pistols and Joy Division and the Clash, kind of bring the punks, and then you get the new wave and get you get post new wave. You get bands like New Order. They kind of took a little bit of that post punk and turned it into like, now we have synthwave. But what I've seen is this cross genre, because like new wave was like an ultimate cross genre. It was a little bit of ska, reggae, punk, progressive rock, blues. It was everything. If you listen to those new wave bands, not all synth. A lot of it, there's a lot of guitar. There's a lot of real drums. There's a lot of different cross pollination of multiple genres in that era. Which we see again happen and people crossing over, hip hop with country and jazz into hip hop and punk into hip hop and classical being behind things, people actually being inventive, which I think is the nature of being a creative, is you're going to realize that you're going to be like Miles Davis and do like a Bitches Brew and create fusion. And the jazz purists are going to say, what are you doing?
Well, I mean, that's what drives us forward is the innovation, right? Because otherwise we just stay in the same lane over and over and over again. And it's good. That well's going to dry up eventually. Things always need to push forward and things always need to become, come out of other movements. Right. And I think too, like, not only in terms of genres, but the world, as it is right now in the 21st century, it opens us up to not only collaborate between genres, but collaborate between communities as well. Like there's always going to be something to say for the strong local scene, the strong local community, but local music no longer has to remain local. You can collaborate, being in Nashville, you can collaborate with artists from Atlanta. I see that collaborative relationship occurring a lot, especially in the hip hop and R&B communities. It's only a 4-hour drive, but like there's a lot happening between those two communities. There's a lot happening between Nashville and Chicago, of course, Nashville and New York, Nashville and LA. And what we're doing here now at UMC is like, we're trying to build those pipelines. Nashville's our home base, but there's a reason why when I named Underground Music Collective, and we moved to Nashville in 2018. We were a regional publication before that in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. We were called Lehigh Valley Underground. But when I rebranded, was getting ready to move here and renamed UMC, I didn't put Nashville in the name for a reason. And although we were adopting Nashville as our new home base, the idea was to be able to branch out anywhere and foster that sense of community, first through our blog content, first through, the reviews, the features, of course, the podcast. We started up the UMC 20 playlist that we release every Tuesday, right around that time. But now we've expanded even further, through educational content, through virtual panels, through our creative agency that we just launched on May 1st, where we have a whole bunch of UMC verified creators of different disciplines who can help you complete your creative projects. So if you're an artist and, you need a new website or you need graphics or photography, videography, you can come to us, and these people will do great work for you for the right reasons. They'll help you achieve your artistic vision. And then it all gets pumped out through our platform, not only here in Nashville, but to anybody who's got eyes and ears on it. So, and that was always the vision, was to have a central hub where people could come and interact with each other, interact with other artists, interact with other creatives, here in other markets. And the way that things are laid out right now digitally, in society is conducive to that. There's never been a more perfect time to branch out in that regard.
Yeah, because I mean, I've talked to a lot of bands in the Nashville scene. I've actually have them on my podcast over the last couple of years. And what I found is like that, when I was growing up in the 70s, Nashville was like the Grand Ole Opry. People are just going to think about that. You're going to think about Johnny Cash. You're going to think about June Carter. You're going to think, okay, that's what that is. But that's not what it is. Because, it's diverse. Anything going in Athens or going on in like the LA scene or the New York music scene. It's that kind of scene. It's a wide open scene. And I've actually, talked to people from that scene that aren't just country music bands. They're new wave bands, punk bands, all kinds of bands. Hip hop people, and it's like what I like about the cross pollination of everything is like I've actually done collaborations with bands in like South Africa, and people in Japan, and because I'm a international podcast. So what I found is like the world has opened up. Like you can talk to somebody in like the Netherlands or in Iceland or in Latvia, and work with like an electronic musician, like in that part of the world, and they're kind of syncing up with where my head's at, and you find out some band on Australia is doing something cool that digs what I'm doing, and they on Instagram they like me, and then we start talking, and they end up on the show. And that's what my show was originally, was just finding guys on Instagram that dig my tunes, and then telling them, hey, I interview people. And then they would come on, and that was my approach.
That's very similar to Twitter. It was Twitter for us in 2013. I just went on Twitter and was like, hey, do you want to be featured on this podcast that has 0 episodes and nobody's ever heard? And a surprising number said yes. And like, it's all grown from there. Like, to your point, like, it's amazing to see the connections that we can make and the common threads that we can find with people halfway across the world.
Yeah, just because it's such a universal thing. It's like the underground scene. And I can see why you didn't use Nashville, because you didn't want people thinking it was the connotation of Nashville has a lot of legacy. And some people would want to use it if they had a certain mindset. But like you're trying to think more holistically or more universal. And underground music, a lot of people might look at that as, oh, it's like, oh, that's like the Sex Pistols, or that's like that Joy Division. It's like, it's something like that. And it's probably wider than that.
It is, absolutely. It's, and that's the thing is, I think, I think underground independent has kind of had like this stigma to it that it's just basement shows and punk rock and this, that, and the other thing. It can be those things, certainly, but it can be anything. The point of an underground movement is for its members to eventually rise up to prominence, right? And that's the way we look at it. Is we're trying to create an ecosystem, not just trying. We are creating an ecosystem where folks have that opportunity, right? Where folks have the opportunity to interact with each other, to build community, strengthen numbers, rise up. We are a big proponent here of the rising tide raises all boats. And in order to do that, we have to join our forces together, and I loved what you said about Nashville and what people think Nashville is, because I think Nashville is a perfect place for us to be, because it's a microcosm of this greater industry. People might, pigeonhole it into, well, it's just this or it's just that. In the case of Nashville, people are like, well, it's just country music there. When I was getting ready to move here, people were like, well, I hope you like country, but
yeah, that's what they think.
I mean, and certainly like there's a strong country presence here, that's undeniable. That's never going away. And it absolutely has and deserves its place. But there's a strong hip hop scene here that's really underserved. There's a strong pop music scene here. There's of course an indie rock scene here. There's a really good R&B and soul community here in Nashville. Jazz. There's everything you could possibly want under the sun.
EDM, techno, electronic, modular heads. Like people think, oh, Berlin's like Kraftwerk, Brian Eno. That's if you're an electronic musician, like, well, in order to really get legitimate. Like I gotta go to Berlin, and I gotta hang out like in Sweden or Latvia or the Netherlands. I gotta go to the Nordic countries because that's where it's really kicking. And it's true, there's certain genres of electronic music there. That's where a lot of people are really active. But you can find people everywhere. I've found people all in corners all over the world
Mm-hmm.
doing heavy metal, doing whatever, and doing whatever. If it was all rock's dead, and I found this band in Australia that was kicking like a Guns N' Roses, and I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And just people just didn't know they were there, and they weren't repeating Guns N' Roses. They were like their own thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's just like what people find.
Yeah, and that just reminds me of like when I was launching the podcast at first in 2013. That was a point in my life as a music consumer, as a listener, where I really felt like I needed something new. Like I felt like before I started the show, I felt like I was having a hard time like discovering new music or discovering things, outside of terrestrial radio, right? And what going on Twitter and just like starting to find artists, find bands, have them come on the show, have us feature their music, interview them, it taught me that there's any kind of genre of music you want being made anywhere in the world. It's just isn't necessarily what's in vogue on the radio right now. Isn't necessarily what's in vogue in a certain, location, demographic, and a certain market. Maybe not, but you can find it and it's out there for you. And by being connected here globally, and by building this community, we're giving people the opportunity to find whatever they want. I mean, the UMC 20 playlist we just released this week, again, we update that every Tuesday. It's got everything under the sun. It starts with hip hop and R&B and soul, goes to pop. Like there's a couple, then we slowly drift from electronica to metalcore to Americana. And like, we try our best to like get as much on it as we can, but make it flow in a way that makes sense, or at least somewhat sense. But in a way that represents the whole of the independent artist community, because it's not just one thing or another, it's not just one location or another. And, locally speaking too, I mean, there's nothing wrong with being proud of where you're from and setting up a good home base. But like when you limit yourself to that, that you're limiting the opportunities that are out there for you to connect to other people. I just remember, when we were Lehigh Valley Underground in Pennsylvania, hour north of Philly, that's the region of Pennsylvania in Eastern PA. It's called the Lehigh Valley. We wouldn't get a whole lot of submissions from outside of that area. Maybe we'd get a Philly once in a while, or Jersey, maybe even New York.
Yeah.
Once in a while, we'd have a publicist from Nashville reach out if their artist was coming through the area. As soon as we rebranded, the floodgates opened up, because now this is like, okay, this is for independent artists everywhere. They're building a community that isn't closed off to, one region or one area of the country. And it's not that in my mind we were ever closed off to that, but I see now how like tying the platform to a location might have put that in some people's minds. And so, I'm glad I made that choice, because I'm finding now as we start to branch out into other markets, with events, we have an event we're going to be doing, outside of Nashville, we're going to be announcing in a couple of weeks, the details of that, like as a litmus test for, trying that out in other markets outside of here. Like as we do that, as we branch out and as we talk to folks all over the country, all over the world now, in a media sense, like it's a good thing we didn't just pigeonhole ourselves to Nashville. I think that's a very valuable decision that we made, because it opens us up to all these different artists, all these different relationships that in turn help grow our platform and support the community that we support. So I feel like, approaching it in a global kind of limitless mind frame is the way to go, especially with technology connecting us more than it ever has.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, I'm from New Hampshire,
Mm-hmm.
and the electronic music scene in New Hampshire is not big at all.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so I can't locally really kick with my region.
Mm-hmm.
If I play, I have to go to New York. I go to Boston. I've done shows in New York and Boston, but really my audience is worldwide.
Right.
Because what the type of music I do is very progressive. Like it's like bands I like are like Funkadelic, yes, Genesis, but then I like Husker Du and I like the Replacements. So my music is very expansive. I can kind of bounce between a punk aesthetic with like a progressive rock band, like a Genesis, like a Peter Gabriel Genesis, art rock kind of concept albums, like Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. But that's not really what's kicking today on the top 10. But around the world, there are people that like that. There are
Yeah.
people that dig that type of sound. And so just because your local area dislikes like Neil Young
Hmm.
or dislikes folk singers or dislikes like grunge rock, or like you don't have to be limited to your local area when you go onto the net or you jump into a collective like yourself, because then you can branch out beyond.
Hmm.
And that's what I've been able to do. Is people are surprised, like, wow,
Hmm.
they don't even imagine I would be from like New Hampshire
Right.
based on what I'm doing,
Right. And I
because
think,
it doesn't sound like it.
yeah, and I think too, like as an original artist, like keeping in mind that in most markets in the country, original music's a tough sell regardless of the genre. I think and I love Bethlehem, I love the Lehigh Valley, but like the thing with it was like the cover scene tended to dominate. And the
Yeah,
original music, like in terms of the artists, like finding paying gigs, number one, it could take years to build to that point where like, a venue's ready to give you a recurring paying gig to play your original music in a market, that size, or in most markets in the country, honestly. It can be tough. And also like it can be a challenge to find the industry resources if you're just limiting yourself to your locale and your locale isn't known as an industry town. I think a big part of the reason, you know, why I came to Nashville in the first place was because I wanted to learn the industry, and a lot of places have great scenes, but don't necessarily have the industry infrastructure to where you're going to be able to grow and connect your music, and build the relationships, for your music or for your platform to ensure its scalability and long-term success, not to get all businessy on you, but like, yeah, it benefits you to think beyond that, especially as
yeah,
an original artist, because, even if your location, even if your local scene is really strong and supportive of original music, it might not be for your genre, or that audience in itself might be limited. So it's always good to keep those broad horizons for yourself, because at the end of the day, your audience is out there. It's just a matter of where they are. It's just a matter of how you find them and what you do to keep them engaged. I mean, I'm sure you found that too, being in New Hampshire, where, it can be tough to find your people, if you just focus on a certain radius. Like you said, you go to Boston, you go to New York, like to play shows, like, and what has your experience been like, in those cities as opposed to staying local? And what has that taught
oh,
you?
well, yeah, the New York audience is that I found producers that dug what I was doing.
Hmm.
That I actually got put on a hip hop tour, and I'm an electronic avant-garde experimental musician, but the hip hop producers, when I played in New York, they all talked to me after the show, asking me to do stuff with them because I'm a synthesis.
Hmm.
And I do a lot of stuff that's like based on classic stuff from like Funkadelic, but
Hmm.
or yes. And so they say, well, people don't see a lot of people doing that anymore.
Right.
There's not a lot of people that do the type of music that I do, because that's not what's kicking people on in the box. I'm using Modes, I'm using Rolands, I'm using real synthesizers. I'm not just kicking off samples and clips. I'm actually playing.
Right.
And so when I actually get in front of people, I can actually play. And it's not just like a DJ kicking off clips. And so it ends up having that kind of dynamicism of our alarm from the heroes I grew up with, like the Stevie Wonders and the Funkadelics and the people with the Stones and the Who. I used
Hmm.
to go see the Who. I would go see the Allman Brothers. I'm into like musicians who play.
Hmm.
I understand there's a different genre today about people who are in the box and people use DAWs and stuff, but I'm more of an old school musician of actually playing.
Right.
So that's where my aesthetic is, and I appreciate hip hop. I like bands I like Earl Sweatshirt. I like De La Soul. I like certain types of hip hop, but I like the stuff that has like a story to it, the stuff that has depth to it. It's just not just taking a sample and putting new lyrics on it. Somebody
Right.
actually being artistic with the sample. Somebody actually thinking about the production.
Hmm.
That's where my head's at.
Yeah, taking what's been done before and making it new and making it your own and making it original.
Yeah.
I think that's an underrated skill to have as an artist, because like you think about it, and you think of like story archetypes, right? There are only a certain number of like story archetypes, in fiction and literature, that kind of thing, like the overarching like hero's journey, right? It's the same thing in music. Like, how many times can you reinvent the wheel? Well, you're not necessarily trying to reinvent the wheel. You're just experimenting to make it operate more efficiently, to make a better wheel, and it's all, everything, I think, too, does derive from something else. I mean, you think about music history, modern music history, and how, the jazz age led to rock and roll, first led to blues, then to rock and roll. And now that everything else that, has come out of that in the past handful of decades, like everything comes from an origin point, and it's what you do and the innovation that happens that's going to push the medium forward of music, of artistic expression. And what that looks like to you, it looks like to you, what, regardless of genre, regardless of your methods, I feel like it's important to realize that if it feels like you're innovative, if it feels like you're creating and improving on the design of something, go do more of that. Go create more, because we need more of that. We need more people pushing that envelope forward. So, I mean, kudos to you for taking those classical sounds as well and like molding them into something your own, molding them into something interesting. And, to your point, that has piqued the interest of people in other genres to open the doors for more collaboration, to open the doors for more innovation.
Yeah, I mean, because one of the things I got into podcasting, because the musicians, we have a problem with the way streaming pays us, right? So we get paid like pennies and pennies on percentage of pennies. So what I found is doing my podcast and talking about music since 2016, I've had opportunities to work with other people. I've had opportunities to work on video game soundtracks, to work on themes for people's websites, themes for therapists that want to do music therapy. So I've found ways to make money with music that are not traditional, because I wasn't thinking in a traditional way. Because right. I'm an experimental artist, so why not? So right. I always ask, like, why not? Dude, I'm a sound designer. I take a Moog and I build my own presets. I build my own drum kits. I don't sample. I take my own stuff from subtractive synthesis. I use old school analog modular synthesizers. And so from that start, I want to create something that builds off the past, but it's new. Right? Yeah. I mean, because you think about Hendrix, even today, people don't match him. People can't even get anywhere close to where his head was at. Now, he was taking the blues, but he took it somewhere else. It's not just the blues. It's not Lead Belly. It's not Robert Johnson. It doesn't even sound like the Stones, right? It's somewhere else. Right. And so you think about like bands like Sun Ra, experimental jazz like that. Like they have so many records that are so out there, like doing all kinds of very experimental things. It's not bebop. It's not fusion. It's something else, right? So like you can take forms and go anywhere. I remember there was a story I was talking about Brian Eno with Bowie when he was working in Berlin. He went onto a chalkboard with a bunch of studio musicians and said, "Why don't we just randomly do these notes?" And the guy said, "Well, they don't go together." So that's the point. I want to do something that's discordant. I want to break rules. I don't want to do what we did, what works. I don't want to do something that was like typically what you do. I want to break the rules. And I like guys like that go in there and that actually changes the game, because then you're not trying to compete with what's in the top 20 or in the top 100. You're trying to do something just for the art's sake of it.
Right. And I think too, if you're trying to follow a trend, that trend already exists. Right. Yeah. And so there's already a precedent for that. Like I always think of, because I grew up in the 90s, I think of the boy band era, right? And how like you had the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, as your 1A and 1B, who was 1A and who was 1B depends on like your preference, right? But then you go down the rungs, you had 98 Degrees had a lot of success. You had LFO had a little bit of success, O-Town. Yeah. And then there were a bunch of boy bands being pumped out of Orlando that like, did they even sniff the radio? Because to your point, they were pumping them out of a factory pretty much. You can go across, any genre of, in the mainstream in that area, you can go pop punk, you can go, you know, with the whole Britney, Christina, Jessica Simpson, Mandy
Yeah, you get the
Moore,
clones.
etc. Like
Clones. Attack of the clones.
yeah, if you're just trying to do the same thing as somebody else, it's already been done. I mean, the modern example right now is Taylor Swift, where it's like, I want to be the next Taylor Swift. Well, there's already a Taylor Swift, and
Yeah.
she's innovating. Like, she's no longer in the box that she started in. Like, she's innovating to a point where now, just this past weekend, as of recording, she's selling out Nissan Stadium 3 nights in a row for the Eras tour, which crosses all the genres she's visited so far and all the
she's
albums.
re-recording all of her albums and do it the way she wanted to.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And then she's willing to like go out and just play her guitar,
yeah,
or do like a Beyonce dance like routine. She's
yeah.
kind of like all over the map, but that's kind of where, you know, the old stars we saw, like the Freddie Mercurys, like the Princes. You know, Prince was like famous. I used to go see him. I went to Paisley Park. He was famous for not playing his hits.
Yeah.
And he personally said, well, I'm not 24 anymore. I was at Paisley Park one time and some guy yelled Purple Rain. He said, hey, I'm not 23 years old anymore.
Right.
You're not going to hear Purple Rain tonight.
Right.
You can leave if you want to, but we're playing something different. Like, and he was into his like power trio mode where he was channeling like Hendrixian type of stuff. And I actually saw him play in his studio that he had set up for, you know, fans to come in. I was a crazy fan. We sit there for 3 hours waiting for him to come out, and he just come out and play this like Santana Hendrixian power trio stuff that I always knew he could do. And it seemed like, well, that's what he seems to really love doing. Like, he loved doing that, but you know, he's a pop star, but he was a very experimental pop star that was willing to do stuff that people weren't expecting.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people don't have the imagination to like challenge things like that.
Yeah. Well, I think, like, you know, as the artist being in that position, you're in a tough position. You've got to make things interesting for yourself while also knowing that people want to hear the hits. Another example that I think of is Bon Jovi. There was the When We Were Beautiful documentary, which came out between the Lost Highway record and The Circle. So it was documenting that whole 2008 tour, the world tour, when they were like at the height of their powers, touring all over the world, selling out stadiums, this, that, and the other thing. And there's a scene, because they played one of the free shows in Central Park in the summer of 2008. And there's a scene where they're backstage and John's like looking at the set list. He's like, okay, what's the audience that we have? And somebody points out, well, it's going to be mostly casuals. It's a free show. So he just kind of looks, so I can't pull my usual tricks. And then it goes into this entire segment about how, like, the songs that are the most artistically fulfilling are often the ones that get the polite applause, like, okay, now play Living on a Prayer and You Give Love a Bad Name. Whereas, like, you know, the stadium bangers, there's still a sense of fulfillment in that exchange, but it's like the more vulnerable moments in the set are kind of artistically what a lot of these artists live for, right? And what a lot of these artists really want to express in that moment. You know, a song written and released in 2007 that was on that album, you know, might have at that point, and I don't want to speak for John Bon Jovi, I have no authority to do that, but like might have been more artistically fulfilling than singing Prayer for the 1,000th time, you know, like that was kind of the vibe of that segment, you know, in that documentary. But they have to balance it out, because at the same time, you have people who, in the case of a Bon Jovi, in the case of a Taylor Swift, Prince, they've paid hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for these tickets. They want to hear Living on a Prayer. They want to hear Purple Rain. They want to hear Shake It Off, you know, just to give an example from each of those artists. So like, you better play it, but also where you can sneak in those moments, you know, that are going to be artistically fulfilling to you. Like, that's the balance. And I think you get to a certain point as an artist too, where you've built your platform to a point where it's like, all right, well, people will stick around and listen to this other stuff I want to play as long as they get what they want too. You know, like Taylor Swift on this tour, because, you know, I looked up the set list. I didn't actually get to go to Nissan, but she snuck in a couple surprise songs every show, and they were different every single night. And they weren't your typical songs that you would hear from her on the radio, like deeper cuts, right? That she prepared for that night of the tour. And it, you know, that's an example of finding the artistic fulfillment, even, you know, in being this mega star with all these anthemic hits that everybody comes to hear. Like, there's still the moments for you to just go inward and be the artist and share that with people too. And I mean, that's the goal for any artist though, right? Is to build the platform to the level where, of course, you have all the success in the world, but that success also gives you the license to do whatever you want, you know, musically with your live show. I think of Lady Gaga too, you know, a mega pop star, you know, came up when I was in college. and, you know, had the Fame Monster, like these huge albums that still resonate today. You still hear those songs out. But then that allowed her to go do whatever she wanted. She made her money, you know, and she gets to go, she can release a pop album and launch a stadium tour if she wants, but she can play the Super Bowl. She could also release a jazz album with Tony Bennett and play a residency in Vegas. She can do movies, like she can do whatever she wants because she is the trend. She has the platform. And of course, like you go to her show, there are things you're going to want to hear, things you might be disappointed if you don't hear, but also, she's created the platform for herself to engage people in that real sense and have had that come back around, you know, to where it's like, hey, you know, there's some new music and I want you to hear it. And she has the captive audience already, you know? Yeah. So that's the goal. That's the dream, is getting to that point, I think, for anybody, to where, of course, you're massively successful, but that gives you the freedom to create even more.
Yeah. Well, I just loved Prince's ability to, kind of do whatever he wanted, because he was at such a level. I saw him during the emancipation period. We broke from Warner Brothers, and he was pointing out that people should own their Mountain Masters and all this stuff. And in that period, he did not play the hits. He played the new material. And the hardcore Purple heads that we were called, we dug it, and we understood what he was doing, because he had broken away from Warner Brothers. He didn't want to be supporting them. They didn't give him the masters, so he's playing all new material that was fantastic. And so we had hardcore fans. I saw him in Boston during the Emancipation Tour, and that was no 1999, no Purple Rain, nothing. He was doing exactly what he wanted. He was doing like he was almost like an independent artist, doing brand new material that you never heard before. Now, some people might say, "Well, I don't like that," but as an artist, I dug where he was, and I got what he was doing.
Right.
You know,
right. And you're always going to have those people who fall off, right? You know, how many times you hear, it was better when they just played the old stuff, or they should just go back to playing the old stuff. You hear that with anybody who's been successful and been in the industry a minute, you know, like and especially for artists who have evolved their sound past what it originally was. But you have to evolve creatively, not only, you know, to adjust to the times and adjust past a particular trend that might have been in when you first got your break, right? But to keep yourself fulfilled and to keep it interesting for yourself as an artist. You know, I think of, you know, so many of my favorite artists and favorite bands, like their sounds have evolved over time, you know, to where if you listen to album number 1 and compare it to album number 10, it's like, who is this band? They're totally different, you know, like I think of Our Lady Peace up in Canada. They're from Canada. They've had a couple big hits down here, but like they came out of the post-grunge movement. That first album, Naveed, is like straight up post-grunge, you know, like with some very interesting, intricate instrumentation, especially in the rhythm section, I will say, you know, but now they've evolved to more of this like art rock, like dance rock kind of project on their most recent album, which is Spiritual Machines 2. And Rain Maida's voice has completely transformed over the course of 25 or so years, you know, almost 30 years since Naveed was released, to where it's like you'd listen to album number 1, you'd listen to album number 10, and his style has evolved so much, you'd be like, hey, where'd they get the new singer? You know what I mean? Like, you know, but it's a way to keep it interesting. It's a way also to continue to evolve, to continue to be able to create, because, you know, singing as he did, you know, he had this like countertenor, like nasally presentation to his singing. If he tried keeping that up for 30 years, the guy wouldn't have a voice left, you know? So like over time too, you've got a right to, you know, ensure the longevity of your career too as a vocalist. But overall, like, you know, artists have the right to evolve. Artists have the right to continue creating, right? And creating what they want. And, you know, the people that connect with that, and the people that are in, you know, for lack of a better term, like the true fans, they don't come to an artist, in my opinion, for like a particular sound or, you know, a particular trend. They come to that artist because something about that artist connects with them on a deeper level. Yeah. And music is the vehicle for that, right? Like you use the example of Prince. It's like you picked up what he was putting down. Well, there were some people that maybe just knew a couple Prince songs, and they paid money to come to the show and hear those couple songs that they knew. You're always going to get that. But the true fans, you know, and for artists listening to this, like, focus on connecting with your true audience, the audience that resonates with you and your story and your values and your beliefs and everything about the essence of who you are. the art, the music is merely a vehicle to communicate that stuff, right?
I think that's where you find bands like the Grateful Dead and Fish, and you get bands like Wilco and the Radioheads. When they perform their songs differently almost every time,
Hmm.
right? And their fans get it, right? So when they do it, it's like you could go see Fish every night, and it's a different kind of version. It's like the way the Dead used to play. Like
Hmm.
when you go to see Funkadelic, when Funkadelic was in its heyday back in the 70s,
Hmm.
right? You would see them actually perform these kind of free jam sessions, and it wasn't the same every time. You could
Yeah.
hear the Mothership connection, but the way they did it was different. Just like
Right.
when Hendrix played, he could go, you could watch, listen to tons of Hendrix concerts. He never played the stuff the same way.
Right.
He
Right.
played it differently all the time. So there's something about like George. I think Jim Morrison said when he was getting left the Doors and was going to be a poet, that he was very disinterested in the pop audience because he said they just want to hear "My Light My Fire" over and over.
Hmm.
And he was
Right.
a very creative person, and so he wasn't really buying that. He didn't really like it, and at the
Right.
end, he kind of rejected it. And so you have to kind of decide what you want as a musician because there's a certain audience that's going to want you to do that repetition.
Right.
And then you have to find out, like I like about Springsteen is he goes and does these concerts, but it's kind of how he presents it. And
Hmm.
he kind of reimagines his music.
Hmm.
And so how he gets presented, he's able to get away with doing it different.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound the same. And he's able to kind of present his songs that people feel familiar with, but he has the ability to present it however he wants.
Mhm, and to weave it together too. And I think that, especially when you have that kind of longevity of a Springsteen, of a Bon Jovi, I think of Dave Matthews too, where like
Yeah.
I have a friend, my friend Dan, he's seen Dave Matthews 41 times, 41 times. And I think maybe he's only heard Ants Marching, which is probably their biggest hit, maybe aside from
Yeah.
Crash, only a handful of those times. The set list is different every night. And the way the songs are played are different every night. And it's really how you weave these different eras of your artistry together. And yes, there are going to be some people who just kind of leave that alone and don't want anything to do with it. They came here to hear a certain thing, play the songs I like, or I won't be happy. But then there are your truer fans who connect with you and who
Yeah.
connect with who you are as an artist, who connect with your artistry itself. And at the end of the day, those are the people that are going to be there, and they're going to at least give every project a listen. They're at least going to, buy the tickets. They're going to buy the merch. They're going to support you however they can because it's something about how you've connected with them, how your music has helped them versus, oh yeah, this is the place to be tonight. This is the thing to do. Let's go hear some hits,
That's what I liked about Bowie, because Bowie, he took theater. He
Mm-hmm.
took the idea of theatrics and made it part of the music,
Mm-hmm.
and then he purposely changed his identity with every project,
Mm-hmm.
so it wouldn't be the same.
Right.
So, like, once he switched out of Ziggy, you're not gonna hear Ziggy songs that much anymore.
Right.
Once he got out of, like, Aladdin Sane, he wasn't doing that anymore. He would change into these characters, and then these characters would be the theme, and people bought it because he brought the theater, he brought that stagecraft.
Right.
Like the Lady Gagas can do it, when you can channel that kind of Madonna level, Prince level, Michael Jackson level theatrics, then
Mm-hmm.
you can create a character like Bad versus Thriller, like,
Right.
versus like, Freddie Mercury doing a Bohemian Rhapsody version of himself versus We Are the Champions version of himself.
Mm-hmm.
It's a totally different version of himself.
Right. Right.
It doesn't look the same at all. And,
Yeah.
so he could channel that through his character. I think that's when you get the people to actually believe in your stagecraft
Mm-hmm.
because the actor part of being a creator. I think that's very important to a lot of, modern musicians to understand how much theatrics is part of the music.
Yeah. How do you bring people in, really? And how do you connect with them in a way that invites them into your world, into the entire creative sphere of what you do? I think that's really the takeaway here, and it might be a particular song that gets somebody started, but that might not be where they end up. I can think of plenty of examples, in my own fandom where it's like the song that started me on this artist or that artist is a song I hardly even remember they released because there's an entire world to discover. And then
Mhm.
you hear that song, it's like, oh yeah, I remember where my journey with this artist started. But like being able to dive into that world, is I think contingent a lot of the times on the way that the artists themselves can engage you. can engage you at this like human molecular level and bring you in, you know, to their entire world. And that is the persona. That is what they put forth and what they represent, regardless of era, regardless of, you know, sound, regardless of what costume they're wearing at the time. It's like, what about this resonates with me on some level I can't quite explain? I think that's really what it boils down to.
Yeah, I was very much into like Pink Floyd and Pete Townsend rock operas. Like, you know, I love Tommy, I love Quadrophenia, I love Dark Side of the Moon, I love Wish You Were Here, I love Animals. And, you know, being a child of the 70s, I would get the vinyl and I'd listen to those Pink Floyd albums all the way through. So I'm a child of the 70s, so everything I listened to was album oriented. So I'd listen to Tommy all the way through, Quadrophenia all the way through. So we're kind of living in an age where people don't do that as much. But part of my music experience was getting the complete thought of an artist and realizing that those deeper tracks actually showed me who they were.
Right.
And I don't know if the modern audience is actually picking up on that with the playlist, which I understand is cool. But I think like if you just read the liner notes of a novel, you don't get into the details.
Right.
And like, so I think some music fans are missing out on the full breadth of an artist if they only listen to playlists.
Yeah, I agree, you know, and I think too, I think it depends on the artist, you know, it depends, you know, the effort that they've put in to bring people into that world, to bring people into those lesser known tracks, those deeper cuts, and how they use those songs to serve the story, I think is important too. And sorry if you're hearing a dog barking in the background.
Okay.
I'm dog sitting right now. And I don't know. I don't know why he's going nuts down there, but I'll find that out in a few minutes, I guess. But yeah, it's really, you know, how are those moments on those albums being used to serve the story in the first place? And is that being emphasized in the marketing and the promotion of the album? You know, and like, you know, how complete of an understanding can you get of who this artist is and what they represent, you know, if you don't dive into that? You know, I think, and that's an artistic choice in itself that the artist has to make. Like, how far do I want people to dig into this? Are these songs just to fill out you know, an obligation to a label, or are these songs part of this greater story? And I think, you know, it is easy to be like, hey, this single got playlisted, that single got playlisted, let's run with this one, let's run with that one. And a lot of what the industry tells you to do is that focus on singles, focus on, you know, one thing at a time, short attention spans, regardless. But then you look at somebody like a Taylor Swift and you look at how many streams every single song on Midnight's has, and
because
it's like,
she thinks like an album, is an album oriented artist. You know, like if you think about like some hip hop guys like Kendrick Lamar, like if you think about Kendrick Lamar, you think about Tyler the Creator. When people get into his work, they get into the whole thing. Like you usually get into a Kendrick Lamar album, you listen to the whole thing. Like you listen to Tyler the Creator, people get into his concepts of like ego or get into like almost every one of his albums is like a theme.
Yeah.
And the songs run into each other like Sgt. Pepper's. And that was the whole idea of Sgt. Pepper's.
Yeah.
That started this whole idea of the album, and now people have gotten away from it.
Yeah.
But it seems in hip hop, because I mentioned like Kendrick Lamar, like Earl Sweatshirts, you know, like Tyler the Creator, you get some of the collectives, like Brockhampton, people will go and listen to the whole project.
Right. And even in pop R&B, you know, The Weeknd just released a brilliant album last year called Dawn FM, where it was
people listen to the whole thing.
It was a conceptual trip through purgatory, right? And like that was the concept on the album. You know, there were narrations from Jim Carrey throughout the album, but the tracks bled one into the other. And what I really appreciate about that album too is he had grown so much as an artist in terms of his subject matter too, and in terms of, you know, just the way he approached these, you know, relationships presented in his lyricism, you know, on that album, as opposed to maybe previous projects. I really enjoyed that album for the composite, you know, experience that it was, you know, and it walks you through, you know, these different kind of movements and these different moments on your journey through purgatory. Like the whole idea of Dawn FM is it's the radio station you listen to on your way through, you know, cruising down the river Styx. You know,
I like artists that do that because I like to get drawn in. Because, like I said, I'm a child of the '70s, and my natural state was 8-track or vinyl.
Right.
And I would listen to the whole thing. I was sitting there listening to like songs in the key of life as a kid, the whole thing,
right,
like all of it, and And I think people miss out. I mean, I grew up listening to the Carpenters all the way through.
Yeah.
Like the whole album, and this stuff was like fantastic. It's like pop music that had depth with Karen Carpenter's voice.
Yeah.
So I was kind of like on one, my mom's playing Karen Carpenter, my brother's playing Zeppelin and Hendrix, and my dad's playing James Brown and Nat King Cole. So I'm hearing all this stuff. My younger brother, he liked like punk. And so like everybody in my family likes something different. So that's why I got this very eclectic point of view, because I was like, wow, it's all good. And then I
Hmm.
would read Rolling Stone and Spin magazine, look for the top 4-star, 5-star records and actually seek them out. So
Right.
I always like on my podcast I do on audio podcast, I always tell people about an album I think they should check out.
Hmm.
And it's just something I think is cool. I just do a podcast and tell people about like Big Star #1 record,
Hmm.
or go tell people to go listen to Neil Young's Time Fade Away and kind of give a reason why.
Yeah.
Um, and I just think people kind of need to have a little bit of a music education and somebody to kind of lead them to maybe check things out
Yeah.
that they wouldn't normally do.
Yeah. And that's what we're here for. That's exactly what we're here for. And I think too, it used to be a lot harder to skip tracks. I remember cassette tapes, fast forward. Oh, I went too far. I got to go back, to start the beginning of the song. Like it used to be a lot harder to skip tracks. Now it's just press a button.
Very
skip,
easy.
skip,
Yeah.
skip, so people don't,
You
people
want-
have an easier mechanism. It's not that they don't have the opportunity to enjoy the whole piece. They have an easier mechanism to, skip to what they think is the good part. But that doesn't mean that the parts they're skipping aren't also the good part, so
I think the problem is the audience today versus when I was a kid. We had
Mhm.
3-4 channels of TV, no internet, the library, right? So you would listen to the whole thing of Zeppelin 4
Mhm.
because like, wow, that's the big deal. Because like but now somebody might send you a tweet, somebody might send you a chat, somebody you got this video game on, your cell phone's ringing off the hook. It's like you get so many distractions. What I try to tell people, like, or enjoy music, think about like reading a novel.
Mhm.
If you read a novel, you set aside time to read the novel.
Right.
To enjoy music and actually check out your playlist at Underground Music Collective. Sit there and actually disconnect a little bit and listen to new stuff. That's what people seem to have forgotten about that. I mean, 'cause I used to go to record store day and physically go to the record store after reading Rolling Stone and pick up the 4 and 5-star records. And because I read the reviews, I would go listen to them. Now, how many kids do they do that? I don't know how many. I don't think a lot.
Well, when it's when it's right at your fingertips, it's a choice.
Yeah.
It's more of a deliberate, immediate, on-demand choice that you can make or not make, and I think that really has a lot to do with it. Honestly, as far as it all comes down to the choices we make, but that's what we're here for, is to inform.
Yeah, because you almost act like a curator. I think people need a curator. They need the people to kind of hip people to say, "Hey, this is cool." Back in the day, it was like Rolling Stone or Beat or Hitmaker or the heavy metal magazine, whatever magazine. You go to a newsstand, you pick up a magazine, and say, "Oh, that's it." You go on MTV, oh, like that's it. And so now it's like we get the pitchforks of the world. You got Underground Music Collective, you got podcasts like mine, but you got to find somebody to kind of guide. I think people need to have like guidance to check out, and then they seek out on your own. Go and actually seek out somebody different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't said it better myself, so the resources are out there, so for anyone listening, use the resources at your disposal. And if we can be a resource in any way, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, everybody check out www.undergroundmusiccollective.com. That's going to be clickable when we fully publish. Like it's on our Facebook and YouTube and Twitch when this is closed and the permanent links out there. That is clickable. So we always tell people, like when we have a guest on a podcast, check out the links we provide. They are clickable. Then you can check it out and fully engage with what we're talking about tonight. Is actually loving music and having a passion for, like, because I hear people say, "Oh, there's no good music today." It's like, are you really looking for it? You know, because maybe the regular radio keeps on playing the same thing they were playing in 10 years ago, but you can find things that are interesting if you look for them.
Absolutely. And it comes down to looking, and you have more tools to do that than ever. So, it just comes full circle to that point. You don't know what's out there unless you actually go seek it out. So let us help you do that.
Well, thank you very much for providing that. I think it's really important for fans to actually engage in order to get the next generation of people out there. We need to be able to engage with the new generation of artists so that we keep music going, because sometimes people, after Napster, there's a devaluation of music. And, I also want to engage people to support the bands you like. If you like a band, buy their merch, go to their website, favorite them, like them, playlist them, heart them. Everywhere you see, subscribe everywhere they have a way for you to subscribe. You got to support the bands you like. Like if you support a YouTuber, support a band, buy their merch, buy their record, buy their CD, go to a show, tell kids about it, bring a friend to the show. That's what you need to do. That's how you keep a scene going.
Absolutely. So many ways to advocate on an artist's behalf, just telling friends, spreading the word, word of mouth is a huge underrated tool in this day and age, and so absolutely. All the ways you named, I think, are a great place to start and continue building community among us all.
And thank you very much for being on the Family Electric Ghost podcast. Hopefully you have your dog's okay. I love pets. My cats bother me a little bit too, because she wants to play with me right now. But luckily you didn't hear her, but she's here.
Yeah, I think I've been upstairs for an hour and they're wondering why.
Yeah,
go
give her a
treat.
treat.
Go take care of that. But thank you so much.
Give her a treat and play with her, and maybe she'll be happy again.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Thanks so much. We'll do it again.
Okay, bye-bye.